Welcome! I'm Kelly Wayment with Silhouette, and I'm here to teach you everything you need to know to get started with using heat transfer material. So what is heat transfer? Heat transfer is a film material that has a heat-activated backing, so it bonds permanently onto fabric. That means it can be applied onto various surfaces, such as t-shirts, pillowcases, and tote bags. You can machine wash items that have heat transfer applied to them. It comes on a heat-resistant transfer liner. If you just cut out your design, this will actually stay on the liner. The liner's sticky and it holds the heat transfer in place until you iron it on and apply heat to your surface. There are several types of heat transfer. You've got metallic, glitter, smooth, flocked, various types of reflective vinyl, and iridescent. It also comes in a wide variety of colors in all of those different types. Let's talk about the tools you need to work with heat transfer. The two most important items you need are a Silhouette machine to do the cutting and an iron so you can apply heat. The Cameo, Portrait, and Curio can all cut heat transfer material. Those all use a mat, but if you use the Cameo or the Portrait, you can actually feed heat transfer on a roll directly into your machine and you don't need a cutting mat. You'll also use a hook tool for weeding. Sometimes you'll use a spatula tool, and you'll use either a cutting mat or you can cut it directly from the roll. If you cut it directly from the roll, you might want to use a roll feeder. That'll keep a large roll holding everything in place so it runs smoothly. You can use any cutting blade. The auto blade, the ratchet blade, and the premium blades will all cut heat transfer. Then you might want a ruler or some kind of tape measure to help you line things up. And then finally, you need a protective barrier so you are covering your heat transfer so you're not ironing directly on it. So that can be a cloth, that can be some kind of paper like parchment paper, or a protective heat-proof sheet. You can cut really intricate designs all the way up to something that fills your entire roll. On this design, I have got some really tiny letters. They're only 1/8 of an inch tall and less than 1 millimeter wide. And that is applied as heat transfer onto this bag, and it stays really well. Heat transfer is also great for layering various colors, so you can apply more than one color to your surface. There are some steps that you use for all heat transfer. You design your image, mirror the design, cut it, weed it, then you place your design onto whatever surface you're applying it to. You apply your heat, and then you peel away the transfer liner and the heat transfer remains behind. We will go through these steps with each lesson. Let's start with a simple design using smooth heat transfer. I want to put my design on a baby bib. I've got this design open from my library, and I have measured my bib, and I knew that my usable space is 6 inches wide by 5 inches high. So I'm going to use my rectangle drawing tool, and I will just draw a rectangle that's going to be 6 inches wide by 5 inches high. I'll use my scale tool to get that exactly how I want it. Okay, so that rectangle is the size I want it, and I can actually use that as a guide while I drag my design's corner handles to make it fit inside of there. And then I can also use this square as a weeding area. So I've got lines that will cut close to the design to help weeding be a little easier. Weed lines are just boxes or lines that divide the design into sections or separates it from the larger piece of heat transfer. This design fits in my rectangle, and I'm going to group the design with the weeding box. And now a key point with doing all heat transfer designs is you need to mirror the design. So I'm going to go up to Object, Mirror, Flip Horizontally. The reason we turn that backwards is because we're actually going to be cutting the back side of the heat transfer material. So the liner will just stay on top of it, and I'll show you that in a minute. The other way to mirror a design is to right-click and just choose Flip Horizontally. All right, now I want to go to my page setup panel, and I want the page itself, the material, to be the same size as the material that I have cut out that I'm going to be cutting from. And so my width is going to be 7 inches wide. My height is going to be 5 inches high. And then I also want to make sure that I have my Cameo mat selected. And I've got the box checked for Show Cut Border. So I know I'm not cutting outside, and I'm just going to select both of those and group. Okay, so I'm actually going to slide this over to make sure I have room for a test cut. We'll go to the Send panel, and you can see those bold lines show that it's ready to cut. And I want to choose my material as Smooth Heat Transfer, so I'll go to Heat Transfer Smooth. I want my action to be cut, and I'm using the auto blade. If you're using a ratchet blade, you can choose that as an option. You just need to make sure that you would adjust it yourself. But I'm using the auto blade in the Cameo 3. Okay, so this shows me my settings, and I want to go ahead and do a test cut once I make sure my machine is connected. Let's move out of the software for a second. And I want my machine to cut the same size that I set as the page size. So you remember I set up 7 inches wide by 5 inches high. So I've just removed the liner from the cutting mat. And there are two sides to heat transfer. The glossy side is the transfer liner. And you want to make sure that that's always the side going down against the sticky mat. We're cutting on the back side, which is the dull side. So the glossy side's down, the dull side is up. I'll just put it on my mat, and I will feed it into the machine. And I'm going to do a test cut. And so I'm going to just let it do it at its default position. I'll unload that, and I want to check and make sure my blade cut all the way through and that peels off cleanly. That was not quite as clean as I wanted to get it, and so I'm going to put that back in. And I will use the arrows on my software to position the blade down again below this original test cut. And I'm going to increase my force up to 10. And I will click Test Cut again. Okay, so we'll check that one. And that's nice and smooth. So we are ready to cut the whole project. This time I will just press Send. When you're using heat transfer, you will get a pop-up to either send it as is or to mirror the design, and we've already mirrored the design, so I can go ahead and click send as is. If I were to choose mirror the design, that would flip the entire page and cut it in reverse, and so you need to make sure that your page size matches what you're using if you're going to let the software do the mirroring for you. I always like to do it so I can send it as is. I've mirrored it myself. Okay, I'll unload this and peel it off with my mat, and now we can do the weeding. So weeding is just pulling away the things that you don't want. Heat transfer material itself is not sticky. So this part right here is not sticky. It's the carrier sheet, the liner, that is the sticky part. Okay, so this design is all weeded, and I have flipped it over, and I'm just going to center it on the bib. Cover it with a protective cloth, and go ahead and just iron that with firm pressure for about 45 to 60 seconds. Okay, and then you just peel it away, and when it's ready, it will come off. Now, if there's some little bits that are still sticking to the liner, just put it back down and iron it a little bit longer. Now just make sure that once you have that heat transfer applied, if you need to iron any more, just always make sure that you cover it with a protective layer. I think that this is going to stick pretty good. You can make a fun little set of bibs as a baby shower gift, and it's so easy. Let's make a larger design we can cut directly from the roll. I'm choosing flocked heat transfer this time, and I want to put it on this large pillowcase. So I've decided on the size I need by measuring with a tape measure to make sure that I've got the size that I want. But another trick I'll use sometimes is to actually print my design on paper from the software, and so I can see how it's going to look on the surface I'm going to apply it to. Let's go ahead and go into the software. So I've opened my design and filled it with color so I'm able to see it. And I want to resize this to about 10 inches wide. I'm going to lock it in place and just change the width to 10 inches. Okay, so that looks good. Again, I'm going to draw a weeding box around it. And I'll go ahead and center that together and group it. If you do have Business Edition, you can have the software create the lines for you. So I'm going to delete this box, and I'll go to my weeding panel. Weed settings panel, and I'm just going to choose some horizontal lines. So you can see the Business Edition will create those lines for you. And I'm not as worried about weed lines being perfect with heat transfer material as I am with adhesive vinyl, just because the heat transfer isn't sticky. So let's flip this horizontally. We want to make sure that we mirror it. So right click, flip horizontally. Then we're going to go to the page setup panel, and I'm going to cut from a 12-inch roll. So I want my width to be 12 inches, and the height doesn't really matter because I'm working with plenty of material there, but I do want my cutting mat to show none. My design is within the cut border, and there's room for a test cut if I need it, but I've already tested this material, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the Send panel, choose Heat Transfer Flocked, and Cut and Auto Blade. And this, like I mentioned, I've already test cut it, and so I'm ready to send it. So let's get this roll loaded, and then we'll send it. So when you're cutting directly from a roll, this one's pretty large, and so I've decided to use my roll feeder. And when I load it into the machine, I need my rollers to be set to hold the heat transfer on both sides. So I'm going to adjust this roller in one notch. If I had 9-inch vinyl, I could move it in another one, but I'm just going to move it to the 12-inch mark. So pull down the release lever, unlock it, slide it over so it fits in the groove, lock it up again, and push the release lever up, and that makes my rollers in place. So this is adjustable. Get that snug. I want, again, the glossy side goes down, the dull side is facing up towards the blade because we're cutting the back side of the heat transfer. I have already trimmed off my leading edge, and so I know that's going to go in perfectly straight. So once that is gripped by both sides, I'll press load and double check to make sure that that looks like it's going evenly across. And so that's all ready, and I'm going to press send. Okay, so I'll unload that, and I'm just going to trim that off of the roll with my trimmer. Okay, so now I've got my hook tool again, and I am just going to weed this. Okay, so now we're ready to apply it to the pillowcase. Again, I'm just going to center it. Maybe use my tape measure. And we'll cover it with, again, a protective cloth. And iron for the 45 to 60 seconds. Make sure that gets a good adhesion to the pillowcase. And on a larger design, you want to make sure that you try and give every section about the same amount of time. Okay, so we've got that on there. I love the flocked vinyl just because it has a fuzzy texture. That makes a great pillow. Metallic heat transfer is beautiful, and I want to put it on a shirt. When you are working with things like t-shirts, it's a good idea to pre-wash anything that's going to be washed again. That both helps remove the sizing and it helps remove chemicals that might stop the heat transfer from applying very well. So I have pre-washed this shirt, and let's go into the software and get our design ready. This time I've got my design and it's filled in so you can see it. We'll draw some quick weed lines. There's a lot of ways you can draw weed lines, but in this case I'm just going to draw a line across and then double click to point edit, and I'll just add some points and drag it out of the way so it's not touching any of the lines in my design. Okay, that'll work. So let's mirror this. So I'm going to right click and choose flip horizontally. And the page setup panel, I want it to be 8 inches wide and 10 inches high. I'm going to use my cutting mat again. So I'll make sure I've got my Cameo cutting mat selected. And I've already trimmed down my metallic heat transfer, so it is 8 by 10. Go to the send panel and make sure it says heat transfer metallic, cut for the action, and the tool is auto blade. And I've tested these settings already, and those work for me. But of course, if you're using a new material, you'll want to test cut yourself. This is ready to load onto the mat and cut. I've got my mat again. And I have my heat transfer. It's cut 8 by 10, glossy side down, and this side, the dull side, is up towards the blade. Now sometimes with heat transfer, if you're using a mat, this really glossy backing layer won't stick to an old mat, so I like to use a nice new sticky mat to make sure it stays in place. So we'll just load this and send it. All right, so I've got my design mostly weeded. Let's just finish that really quick. These little bits are come off. Since the heat transfer liner is sticky, you can just put them back in place. Okay, so I'm just going to flip it over and center it on my t-shirt. And with the heat transfer liner being sticky, especially on shirts, I will often hold it up and it will stick to the shirt, and so you can hold it up in front of a mirror or something and see if it looks the way you want. So we're ready to iron that. So I'll cover it with a cloth. So again, just follow the instructions every time on how long to iron it. Every iron's a little bit different, but generally you want to use a cotton setting and make sure that you don't have it set for steam. If you have a way of telling the temperature, you should not go above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So with most of these heat transfer types, you can peel off the transfer liner while it's still warm, but with the metallic heat transfer in particular, and maybe sometimes the flocked, if it doesn't feel like it's coming off while it's warm, you can let it cool and peel it off once it's cool, and that might work better for you. So you may hear the term warm peel or cold peel. That's what that's talking about. You can peel off the liner while it's warm, or you need to wait until it's cooled off, and that's called a cold peel. If you want to cool it down faster, you can put it on a separate surface that is maybe cool, like a granite countertop. That will sometimes make it cool faster. But this looks like it is coming off. And again, if there's any parts that don't come off cleanly from the liner, you can just iron it again. And if it comes off the liner but you're still concerned that it's not stuck well enough, you can put your cloth back on, or you can flip your shirt inside out and iron from the back side and heat it up from the back. Just make sure you don't ever put your iron directly on to your heat transfer once the liner is removed. When you're doing something like a t-shirt, just make sure that you wash it, turn it inside out, and use like a cold water and gentle cycle, and that should make your heat transfer last a lot longer. In this next project, you'll see that heat transfer can be cut in really intricate designs that you can apply it to surfaces you might not initially think of, and that you can layer multiple colors together. So let's go into the software and I'll show you how to do that. So I have a design that I want to put on a mouse pad, and so I've just designed it with this blue to represent my mouse pad, and I've filled the colors of my design with the colors that they're going to be cut from. We're going to select this, and we're going to mirror the design. Right-click and flip horizontally, and we are going to cut by fill color. So I'm just going to leave this blue on the page, and we'll be able to ignore it, and I'll show you that in a second. So let me zoom in. Move the entire design over to the upper left corner, and I'm going to go ahead and just leave this set at the full 12 by 12 inch page size and leave my cutting mat set at the Cameo. We'll go to the Send panel, and this time we'll go to Action by Fill, meaning fill color. So this gives me a box for each color that's on my page, the white, the green, and the blue. So they have a colored square to represent them. Each box that is checked, the machine intends to cut. So let's uncheck the blue because I don't want to cut the mouse pad. That was just a visual representation. And I want to make sure that these colors I am going to cut are set to heat transfer smooth. Make sure that you get that set for each line. And my action, I want to leave it cut, and my tool, I've left it auto blade. But again, even in the Action by Fill panel, you are able to change that over here just by clicking on it. So I want to check the box for the white. I'm going to cut the white first, so I want to uncheck the green. When I load my mat, I'll put my white material over here in the upper left-hand corner that's big enough for that area, and it's only going to cut white because white is checked. So if I press send, it's going to go ahead and cut just the white. Once that white is finished cutting, then I would unload my mat, take the white off, put the green on my mat, and uncheck the white color and check the box for the green color. Make sure that my green is on my mat. I'll load it, and I can go ahead and send, and it will only cut the green. I've already done that and I've weeded it, so let's look at it and apply it to the mouse pad. You can see that I've got both this green and this white. So I want to make sure that those both fit on the mouse pad. So I'm going to line things up, and I'll just do one color at a time. Okay, so I'll put my protective cloth on there. When you're doing multiple colors, you only want to press and give the heat long enough for the first color to stick. You don't want to do it for the full length of time, because once you add the second color, then you're going to be heating that again, and you don't want to melt it. And you can see that is a pretty intricate cut. So we can go ahead and put the green on there. And with heat transfer, you just kind of eyeball it to make sure that it looks right. Now, if the second color is completely covering the first color, you can go ahead and do the full length of time. If you have parts of your liner that overlap and would leave creases in your first color, then you would just do it again for a short amount of time, and then remove it all and cover it with your cloth and iron again. But for now, that covers it all, and so I can iron that for the full amount of time. So I'm going to cover this with my cloth and iron it one more time. Remember, never iron directly on heat transfer that's already there. Especially when you are trying something new that's not a typical surface like a t-shirt, you just want to make sure that you are not too hot for the material. And on something like this that is not going to be washed, you're okay to give it a little less time if you're worried about it burning or melting. But you can see that you can add a couple of colors together and you can get really nice intricate detail with heat transfer. And so multiple colors is a really fun way to use heat transfer. So we just did a design where we layered multiple colors and the layers were next to each other, but you can also layer multiple colors of heat transfer where the design actually covers another part of the design. A good way to do that is to actually remove the underneath layer in the software, so you're kind of reducing the bulk. Let's look at this design in the software. And I want to put this on a t-shirt, and right now I have the words overlapping the fan. I want to actually cut a section out where those words can be applied. So we do that in the Modify panel with the Modify tools. So I'm going to select both of these parts of the design, and I'm going to choose Subtract All, and what that does is it erases any part of a design that's covered by another design. So if I click Subtract All, then when I move away the words, it has actually made a cutout in the layer underneath. And so I can cut these separately with heat transfer. And I'm not going to show you that this time in the software, but I will show you how it looks after I've cut it. I've already cut the fan out of iridescent heat transfer, and I have applied it to this t-shirt. And I've also cut the white, and you can see that that cutout is perfectly there, and so you can just layer the heat transfer right on top of it, and it's not going to have any seams or bulk or ridges that you can see from any design underneath it. That is ready to iron. I will just cover it with my cloth. Again, make sure that if you've got heat transfer already down there, you really need to cover it with some kind of protective layer before you iron on the next layer. There we go. So we've got two layers that overlap and there's no bulk or seams that you can see. Let's do 3 colors of heat transfer this time using just small scraps of glitter heat transfer. We'll go into the software and I'll show you how to do that. All right, we're going to do a makeup pouch this time. And so I've got my design on the screen the way I want it to look, and I don't need the black piece. And I'm going to go ahead and select all of those. and mirror them. And when you're using small scraps, this time we're just going to cut the pieces one at a time. So we'll just move the extra pieces off into the holding area. I'll cut the gold, then I'll move it off, cut the red or the pink, and then move that one off. And so we just cut one at a time, and I make sure that my heat transfer scrap is on my mat, the same place it's on my virtual mat. I have these already cut and weeded, and so I'll just iron one at a time onto the makeup bag. And it's the same every time you're doing multiple colors of heat transfer. You want to make sure that you are definitely covering up with a protective cloth any part of the design that is already applied and the liner removed. So I'll just iron these one at a time, remove the liner, put the next design on and cover it with a protective cloth, and just do that for all three colors to make sure that they are all on there securely. When it's all done, you've got a really fun glitter makeup pouch. You've seen a range of different types of heat transfer, including smooth, glitter, and flocked. But now I want to show you printable heat transfer. Printable heat transfer comes in letter size sheets. Let's go into the software and I'll show you how to set up this design. So I have this design set up as a print and cut, meaning it has color on the design, it has cut lines, and it has the registration marks turned on. I want to make sure that my page size is set up to letter because that matches the heat transfer sheets. And something you want to watch for in print and cut designs is the line thickness. So if I select this design and check the line thickness over here, it has 1.0 point as the line thickness. That would make these red cut lines print with the rest of the design, and I don't want that. So anytime I'm printing a design, I want the line thickness to be 0, anything higher than that, and it will actually print with the rest of the design. So I've already mirrored this design, and we can just send it to print. And make sure when you print your design on either type of heat transfer, for either light fabrics or dark fabrics, that you print it on the blank side. So this one prints out on a grid. Let me show you the send panel. So we want it to be heat transfer printable for light fabrics. And it's set to cut and auto blade. That's what I want. And I'll just check quickly, make sure that my cut lines are going to cut. That preview shows right. And so after I have my printout, I can place it on my mat and click send. And so we'll go ahead and do that. Here's my printout, and I've got the registration marks on, and so it's all set to print. It has its own backing, so you want to put the grid side against the sticky mat so the design and the registration marks are facing up towards the blade. So once I hit send, it's going to treat it the same as any print and cut, where it will read the registration marks before it actually cuts the design. Okay, so I have my design that's all cut out, and now we'll just weed away the extra. We're just going to leave the design itself on the backing. And if you want, you can just trim it down a little closer to the design itself. is printable heat transfer for light fabrics, and so you do want to make sure that you choose a light fabric. And for this project, I've got a tote bag. So you'll flip it over and put the design against the fabric, and your grid side is facing up. Now with printable heat transfer, I like to use parchment paper as my protective surface instead of a cloth. And on this one, we're going to go about 30 to 40 seconds, a little bit less than the other types of heat transfer. All right, so let's check this. That looks good. So that is how it looks on a white tote. Just make sure that you are using a light color because it will take on, it'll show through the color. Anything that's white or transparent in your design is going to also show through to the color beneath it. So don't use anything dark or something that would change the color of your design. And I should also mention that this works better with a stiff fabric and not something that gets stretched a lot. Let's move on to printable heat transfer for dark fabrics. This type of heat transfer is a little different from the rest of them in that you do not need to mirror the design. You're actually going to be peeling off the design off of its backing and hand placing it onto your fabric surface. It's a good idea to just pick one design or just a few that you can hand place that will not be too much trouble. Okay, so let's go into the software. This design, I've got a bicycle and I want to put it onto a black tote bag. This again is a pre-made print and cut, and so I want to make sure that my line thickness is 0.0 so the cut line doesn't print with the rest of the design. I've got my registration marks on and my page size is set to letter, and I do have my Cameo mat selected. Remember, we don't want to mirror this design, and so it is ready to print. And again, just like with the light printable heat transfer, you want to make sure that you're printing on the blank side, the white side of the heat transfer sheet. Back into the send panel, we'll choose heat transfer printable for dark fabric, action cut, and my auto blade, and I can see my cut lines are on. Once I've got my printout loaded onto my Cameo cutting mat, I'm ready to press send. Make sure that you're placing your design and the registration marks so they're facing up, and the backing with any printing goes down against the sticky mat. So we'll load that, and once I press send, it will read the registration marks and cut. Okay, so I have my printout that has been cut, and so this time, once I weed away the extra parts, then that gives me access to the design itself. Printable heat transfer for dark fabrics, we're actually going to peel it off of the backing, and I find that a spatula tool does a little better for this job than the hook tool because I don't want to poke through anything. So I'll just kind of slide that along there and get that peeled off. So I have my black tote bag, And you'll see as I put this design here against the bag that anything that was white or transparent in the design now has this solid or opaque white border. That means you can put this type of printable heat transfer on any surface. Just know that you're going to get that white border and background. So once I have that where I want it, again I'll use parchment paper as my protective surface. And we don't want to get this one too hot. Okay, that's all done. As we conclude with heat transfer, I want to leave you with a few final tips. Make sure that you pre-wash your items that'll be washed again, both to remove chemicals and sizing, to make sure that your heat transfer sticks better and stays on longer. When you do want to wash those, make sure that you turn it inside out and wash on a cold cycle, gentle, and tumble dry low. You can layer heat transfer, especially smooth heat transfer. Just make sure that if you're using glitter heat transfer or flocked heat transfer, that becomes the top layer. Make sure you follow the instructions for how long to iron onto your surface. You can use a heat press. Just make sure that you follow the manufacturer's instructions for both time and pressure. Generally, with a heat press, you're going to spend less time than you would with the same material for an iron. Don't use a hotter temperature than the material can handle, whether that's the heat transfer material itself or the fabric. I want to show you a few more examples of things that you can add heat transfer to. It's not just for fabric and it's not just for clothes. I've added this that has a similar surface as the mouse pad we did earlier. This is a laptop sleeve. You can put heat transfer on paper, and you can even add it to a canvas printout. We've covered what heat transfer is, different types available, how to cut and weed it, and how to apply it. If you ever get stuck, you can reach out to the support team, support@silhouetteamerica.com. Thanks for joining me, and good luck with your heat transfer projects.